Got it.
Oh, seems
There
like
you
I
go.
have to be the one recording then.
Got it. Okay,
Okay,
good.
yeah,
Thank you.
I've got it on.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, John, back to you. John Stonier.
Okay, I will start sharing my screen here. I'll just before I start, I used to do presentations around electric cars starting in about, well, I think as early as 2006. And back then, there were no electric cars. In fact, there was a popular movie out called Who Killed the Electric Car by Chris Payne. And that sort of chronicled the first move into electric cars in the mid 90s and GM's basically recall of them and crushing of their almost all of their 4,200 cars that they produced. And it was, and back then we didn't have new cars to compare against, and it was a real tough slog. Now I did those presentations for probably about 10 years until early teens, and then I haven't done any for a while. So this is my first one I've done in a long time. I've learned an awful lot. The business, the whole area of electric cars has just exploded, and it's a completely different scenario today. So I put this presentation together just in the last few days since Neil has contacted me. So it's all new. Hopefully it won't fall off the wheels, but I'll share it here and we'll start going. Okay. So the question that Neil asked me to address is why go electric? So before we start here, I will give you some background on where British Columbia is in the electric car adoption. And actually, as it turns out, we are a leader in North America. Based on Q1 sales, this is the first quarter of 2002, BC, the percentage of electric cars of all car sales in the first quarter was about 17%. In Metro Vancouver, it's even higher at almost 22%. Now, what's happened since that time, you've all heard about supply chain issues and everything else. Q2 wasn't as strong with electric vehicles, but there was more electric vehicles sold than in Q1, but the percentage went down because the supply of them has sort of dried up because of all the supply chain issues. But BC is a leader. The only other place you can get anywhere close to 20% sales is if you go to Europe. And that would be Germany. And of course, there's Norway, which is a world leader at they are at over 80% of new car sales are electric cars now. And you might be interested, well, where are all these cars in British Columbia? Well, these are the ICBC stats that they were published, I guess, back in June. So we went through them and figured out what was going on. So about 61,000 at the end of last year. That's the latest data available from ICBC. And at that time, Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, is the largest single community with the number of vehicles. And you can see a 53% growth rate in 2021. I would suggest that this year it'll be about the same, even though the popularity and the demand for electric cars has gone up, the supply chain issue has really stopped that growth. We can talk about, if you want to get a car today, what it's going to take. You can see the other cities that are also large here, mainly around the Lower Mainland. Victoria is another area that has a lot of cars, and it probably has the highest per capita adoption rate in Victoria, but they're a smaller center. So then you might be interested to know, well, what are the most popular cars? Well, obviously Tesla is the market leader. They dominate, they produce the most cars. In fact, Vancouver is their second most popular delivery location next to Fremont in California, their Fremont plant. And Vancouver sells more cars than anywhere else except for Fremont as far as delivery of vehicles. And you can see down the bottom here, these Model 3s. This was a picture taken back in about 2018 when they were starting to ship cars into British Columbia in large quantities. And that has occurred in in fits and starts, sometimes for really weird reasons. Like one of the reasons was Tesla was coming up to at June, I think it was June 30th, 2018, Tesla was coming up to their 200,000 car limit for tax credits in the US. So instead of triggering that tax credit before the quarter end at June 30th, they shipped a whole bunch of cars into Canada and filled all the orders that were sitting out in Canada. So that way they didn't hit the 2,000 limit until the next quarter. And then since it's a quarterly announcement, they were able to maintain those tax credits for another quarter. This is the kind of stuff that causes some really weird things to happen in supply chain. But as of December 31st last year, Tesla that's on top. Nissan Leafs have been a solid, very popular car in British Columbia. A lot of the Nissan Leafs have come in as secondhand cars from the States. Chevrolet Bolt, basically, again, most of them have been delivered from GM. A lot of them got shifted to British Columbia from other places when Doug Ford in Ontario canceled all their very lucrative, they had $10,000 tax credits or rebates for electric cars back in 2017. When he canceled that program, all of the Chevrolet Bolts that were in Ontario got shipped out to Vancouver. And of course, so there's more Chevrolets. Hyundai and Kia are interesting. They are really coming up. I think in the next year's results, you're going to see them move up the list. I would suggest they're going to overtake Chevrolet and perhaps Nissan. Another interesting tax thing is that Hyundai and Kia are not produced in North America, so they don't qualify for the US tax credit. So they will be selling less of them in the States, and more of product will be available to come to Canada. The other ones to look forward, I would say in the coming year would be Volkswagen. Are definitely their ID4s are starting to ship in volume now. They're starting to produce them in the States. Volvo is shipping more. Polestar is advertising. If you've seen the SkyTrain, there's an entire train that's plastered with Polestar electric car, 100% electric, as an advertising. So I'm sure they wouldn't have put that on the train unless they could sell cars. And I know they're selling, they have vehicles available. Rivian is another interesting entrant, pickup truck. Only one was delivered by the end of last year. You'll see a lot more this year. And of course, on the Ford side, you'll see the E150s, electric 150 pickup truck, which is a very popular model. So to get to the question, why go EV? So I'm going to provide you with 8 reasons why EVs make a lot of sense. And I hope it makes sense with you. This 2012 Leaf is actually my car, my second electric car. And it actually has the plate off my first electric car, which was a converted Porsche. And I used to drive around my converted Porsche and people would say, is that how you made your money? Unfortunately, it was a play on words to talk about going electric. And now I have it on my Nissan Leaf, which is now over 10 years old. So the Nissan Leaf is a 10-year-old car, one of the oldest electric cars around that you can find. There are a few Teslas that are older, but it's been very dependable. So the reasons, economics, any accountant's going to appreciate Nissan Leafs or any electric car. The cost of gasoline at, well, whatever it is this week, it's up, it's down, it's all around. Seems to be, in my mind, opportunistic pricing, not really reflective of actual costs of the oil producers. But electric cars are essentially about 1/10 the cost to drive electric per kilometer than what you're paying in gasoline. And it varies, but a rule of thumb today is about 1/10 the cost. Operating, there's virtually no maintenance on your car. My 10-year-old Nissan Leaf, I've had to replace 2 12-volt batteries, that 150-year-old lead acid battery for your 12-volt. I've had to replace 2 of those. And basically I've replaced some tires and windshield wipers. And that's about it. The brakes on an electric car will last a long, long time, much longer than regular brakes, because you're not really using them. You're actually regenerating electricity. That's part of the efficiency. And it's part of the why the brakes aren't used, because you're using your motor as a generator to put energy back into your battery pack as part of the whole overall efficiency. And it's a very interesting dynamic when you're driving a car like that. High resale value. Well, you know, I'm going to talk at the very end of this presentation about buying used, and buying used cars generally makes sense, but right now, used electric cars are worth more than new cars in some cases. So it's quite something. As far as performance, electric versus internal combustion, there's no comparison. It's all performance. It's torque. My 2012 Nissan Leaf, I think the equivalent horsepower, if I want to talk about horsepower versus kilowatts, is like 109 horsepower. I did sort of in my early days race a Maserati down Pacific Boulevard in downtown Vancouver once. The Maserati couldn't catch up to me, and I was driving my car in eco mode. There is just no comparison. Internal combustion does not have the performance of electric. Electric is truly stunning, and everybody that starts driving electric goes, wow, that's what they say. It's also very stable, low center of gravity, because the batteries are at the bottom of the car, and the driving experience is completely improved over internal combustion. On efficiency, I talked about where there's basically overall efficiency of electromagnetic drives as compared to internal combustion. Internal combustion is about, on a good day, 20% efficient of converting gasoline into wheel torque. The equivalent for electric vehicles is about 80%. You lose 10% in the battery of electricity going in and out of the battery. You lose about 10% in all the power electronics, but 80% of that energy going into your car is turning a wheel, and it's actually productive use. The problem, the easy way to be an armchair energy expert is, if you're putting energy in to drive something and a bunch of heat comes out, you know it's inefficient. And internal combustion engine cars produce a massive amount of heat that they have to get rid of it through radiators and exhaust. That's the telltale sign. I talked about regenerative braking. And the great thing about the efficiency of electric cars is the ability to refuel. Essentially, almost 99.99% of buildings in North America have electricity, which means you can charge from virtually any building right now. And it may be slow at 110, but once you have your 220 volt charger, and you like to sleep 8 hours, you have more than enough capacity to charge overnight. And that can be from wherever you have that set up. Safety. You know, driving around, if you live in a condo and you're driving around your underground parkade, you know how those big fans have to come on every time somebody starts up their internal combustion engine car? Well, electric cars don't do that. So the fans don't come on because they don't need to, because they're not creating any fumes. There's no carbon monoxide, there's no carbon dioxide, there's no particulates. Wonderful. The batteries are extremely safe. There have been reports of electric car fires. If you look at the statistics, it's virtually non-existent compared to the 250,000 gasoline car fires that happen every year. Just no comparison. So 4 more reasons. Luxury. So I put these 2 pictures up. The 2018 Nissan Leaf is actually my 3rd electric car, which I have in my garage today. The one on the right is a top of the line luxury car called the Lucid Air. It's a Lucid Air Grand Touring. And I had the opportunity to drive this Lucid Air. It was the first one in British Columbia on the end of July. It had just arrived that day, the first production car as opposed to a prototype car. And it's a $216,000 price tag, I believe. I had the chance to drive it. I was driving it around downtown Vancouver. And then I immediately got from the Lucid Grand Touring sedan into my car, which is a 2018 Nissan Leaf, just like this one here. There's not much of a difference. Both of them are extremely quiet, extremely comfortable. Only mine is, when I bought it used, cost about 1/8 the cost of the Lucid. Lucid definitely has bragging rights, no doubt about it. More horsepower, more range, luxury finishes, but my plain old secondhand Nissan Leaf is just as quiet, all the power you need and more. You can still beat that Maserati off the line with the 2012 Leaf. So that's the luxury. The luxury electric is built-in luxury. It's quiet, it's vibration free, and it has a high eco status for being green. Climate resiliency. This is a new thing that we've just been starting to think about in the last few years, and that is all about what happens when you have an atmospheric river, and as of tonight, there's 40,000 households that are out of power. Electric cars have the ability to provide that emergency power, and they have enough energy in them to last a single family home 2 to 3 days. They also have the ability to go beyond just sort of emergency power. At some point in time, you can actually flow electricity. This is not today, but I would say 5 to 10 years from now, you'll be able to flow electricity from electric cars that are plugged in. And say if you live in a condo, you might be using that electricity to offset peak period pricing, which is going to be coming in the next few years in British Columbia, and charge up with cheap pricing overnight, flow it into the building, and get some kind of compensation for that, for all the people that lend their batteries to doing that. That is a thing that's going to help. And this is where a lot of pundits say, oh, the electric car is going to crash the grid. I've been listening to this argument for 10 years, and those people simply don't know what the technology can do. So, and there's a lot of great solutions there. Environment, low operating emissions, obviously, but one of the main things, every car that's produced today, the standard car produces about 10 tons of CO2 just to make a car, whether it's a electric car or an internal combustion engine car. It's still about 10 tons, and some of them are worse than others. If you're driving around luxury cars and Range Rovers and stuff, you're probably dumping 17 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere just to have that car built. And then an internal combustion engine car is putting in 2 to 5 megatons of, or 2 to 5 tons of CO2 per year from exhaust emissions. And then you think about the parts that have to be made. Those parts have carbon footprints. The oil that's changed, everything has a carbon footprint. Electric cars, no maintenance. Once they're built, they don't create emissions from the tailpipe. It depends on the emissions from the electrical source. But even if you have pure coal producing electricity, you're still 60% better than a gasoline car. And in British Columbia, we have virtually 98% carbon-free electricity. So there's a real difference in British Columbia. The last reason is satisfaction. You will probably never buy another car that will provide you with so much immense satisfaction, reliability, quietness, performance, everything you've ever wanted in a car, you're going to get in an electric car. It really is a selling point. Okay. So which one is the best car for you? There's sort of extremes. Some people drive a lot, and they're traveling from here to Kelowna or here to Calgary, or they're driving in the States a lot. If you are a long range driver, the cars that you want are available today. You don't have, there's long range versions. The ID4 Volkswagen comes with 82 kilowatt hours of battery range that's close to 500 kilometers range. Teslas are all exceeding 500 for the most part in their larger packs. They're 500 kilometers is what you want if you're driving on a regular basis. But for most people, you're probably not. But the actual range you need depends on how many chargers are available to you. And 10 years ago, it was a challenge to even go up the Coquihalla Highway because going uphill takes a lot more energy than going downhill. And to get up that hill, a lot of cars like the early Nissan Leafs couldn't do it. People tried, but you need more charging. Well, now we have charging available. So there's on average about every 50 kilometers, you can find fast chargers in British Columbia on all the main highways in the south, not in the north. It's a little bit better now between Cache Creek and Prince George. Highway 16's got a little bit of charging on it now, but there's a lot more to be done up north. But anywhere in the south, you don't have to worry about it. These are some pictures of a Tesla supercharge station that I was at when I took a cross-country tour across Canada in May. And you can see my across the street is the Petrocan fast chargers in Ignis, Ontario. And this was taken in May of this year. And they're right across Canada. The Trans-Canada Highway is well stocked. If your driving habits are more urban commuter, my issue with electric cars is basically most cars have too much range for what you need. And what the downside of that is the car is more expensive than it has to be. It's heavier than it has to be. And essentially, if you're just driving around town for the most part, the average driver in Canada is about 50 kilometers. The average urban driver is about 30 to 40 kilometers per day, which is about 6 or 7 kilowatt hours. And if you multiply that by, say, a generous 15 cents, you're still talking a very low amount of money. It's about, $1.20 a day to drive your car. So that's about, whatever, $35 a month, maybe. It's pretty low. And there's charging all over the downtown core. Most EVs will actually show you where the charging is. This is a picture off my screen this is actually off my 2012 Leaf. The newer Leafs have even better graphics, and the new electric cars, Teslas, etc., have even larger and more detailed screens. So the best EV for you is probably less than you think, but I think the auto industry is taking advantage of range anxiety, and I really think it's a consumer perception that people scare you with, as opposed to what you actually need driving. So my 2012 Nissan Leaf, you've probably heard the batteries degrade over time. They do. And they basically, the auto industry says, well, once your battery is 70% capacity, so if you could go 100 kilometers at the beginning, you can only go 70 kilometers now. That's essentially what my 2012 Leaf is where it's at. It started out at about 120. It now does about 80. But as my city car, I really don't need it. And in fact, I only charge it up about once a week, because even though I have available to charge it up every night in my parking, it still takes that extra 10 seconds to put the charging plug in. So I only charge it up once a week. If you drive more, you can charge more if you can charge at home. What you want to be able to do is be able to charge at home. But the charging opportunities on the road when you're away from home are improving all the time. We're not where we need to be yet. If you're driving on a busy weekend, a long weekend, there are going to be lineups at the supercharge and the fast charge stations. And that's something that governments are working on. And there's some really good things that have happened to do that. And so my main point here is that range anxiety is really really a manufactured thing. And here's the thing. It shouldn't be called range anxiety. It should be called range assurance, because virtually every car will have a gauge. This is the Nissan Leaf. These blue, dark blue onto the left of that of the marker there are regen, and they will illuminate as you're regenerating electricity. And the other ones are when you're going forward and you're accelerating. If you accelerate hard, it'll go maybe halfway up. Going to actual 10 is scary. You would be scared at 10. That's a lot of acceleration. If you keep it in the eco mode, you will be driving efficiently. And then there's a big number in the middle that says that's how many kilometers you have. So this is a picture of actually my 2018 Leaf, and I took it the other night. I had 87% state of charge, and I normally get about 230 reliable kilometers out of a full charge. I've never had it down below, I guess I've had it down to 20% once, but it's hard to get it down that far. I don't do a lot of driving, but if I drive out to Chilliwack and back, then I will charge up on the way back. Actually, I usually charge at my nephew's place. I just plug into his welding outlet, and just a few hours there, and I've got all the charge I need. There's some benefits though to driving in the middle of the battery pack. It's been known for years, and many studies have shown that if you drive and keep your battery charged between 30 and 80%, don't bring it to 100%, but drive in that middle range, you will suffer virtually no degradation of your pack if you keep it between 30 and 80%. And manufacturers, when they store batteries for a long period of time, they store them at 50% state of charge. That is the neutral part of the battery where the chemistry is at the least stressed. So if you're driving between 30 and 80% all the time, you don't have to charge it up to full. Just charge it up to 80% and drive it as much as you need. You know how much range you're driving in a day, and the car is going to tell you exactly how much. All right, let's move along. Again, if you're traveling, there's some really neat things happening now. There's more and more condos are putting in visitor charging areas, like here in a local, this is a condo just a few blocks from where I am in Citygate. And shortly we are going to have DC fast charge stations on the highways that are centers where you can go for half an hour, use the facilities, buy some meals, have a coffee, and in 20 minutes, 30 minutes time, your car will be recharged enough for your next leg of the journey. And it makes for a very relaxing and very great way to travel by car. Personally, I guess in my younger years, I used to do the 32-hour marathons driving from Winnipeg to Vancouver in one shot. Don't do that anymore. Having a nice break every now and again is what I'm looking forward to when I take my car on the road. But your home charging status is a big factor in buying a car. And I guess the question is, are you what's called a garage orphan? There are lots of solutions available. If you live in a single family house, which most of us don't in downtown Vancouver, single family homes are pretty easy to wire in a charger. It doesn't cost a lot of money. You can actually just borrow your dryer plug and switch it back and forth, and have an outlet close to where you park your car at your single family home. Multiple unit residential buildings, condos, rental buildings, those are the issue. The new laws that came into effect there's 15 cities in British Columbia that require all new MURBs to have 100% of the parking stalls wired and ready to go. That's what all new buildings have in the largest 15 cities in British Columbia. For the old ones, there's some really great incentives available. And that's where I started helping out with stratas earlier on this year, and that's what I'm doing now. And there's grants, and there's another really key thing that's happened which is the availability of carbon credits to rental buildings and stratas that have more than 5 suites. That is a very serious funding source and revenue source for buildings going forward. So there are some great solutions. You don't have to run your extension cord from in this 4th floor building down to the car. This is actually a friend's of mine car who he actually did that, I think, just for a stunt a few years ago, but that was about 10 years ago, I think, at this point. So the other thing is an electric car actually what you need? Cars are expensive. Electric cars are a little bit more expensive to buy. They definitely trade off in operating cost savings. Once you have your electric car, it's like less than a cup of coffee a day to run it. It is incredibly reliable and everything else. There's a lot of other electric vehicles out there. These line bikes have started to show up in Richmond and North Vancouver. Moto and Evo hasn't gone full electric yet. They're still mostly hybrids. They have some plug-in hybrids now. Moto has a few plug-in cars. This is actually a hydrogen car that they've done, which is just an electric car with a hydrogen fuel cell as the battery pack instead of a battery pack. And there's advantages for hydrogen fuel cells, not so much in cars, but more in the heavy-duty trucks. That's where it's going to be more valuable. And in Vancouver, we've got a history since 1890 of having electric vehicles, as starting with the streetcars in 1890, and then our trolley buses in 1948, and now SkyTrain since 1983, all electric transport. So there's lots of other electric things to consider in Vancouver. Just before I finish off here, a couple of things. Some interesting things on the types of cars available. Obviously, Tesla is the dominant electric car. Fantastic what they've done. They've set the whole industry on edge, and the industry is now clearly following them. The greatest thing I think that Tesla is offering as a differentiator right now is this full self-driving, to be able to have your car drive you where you want to go without having much interaction. That is probably the leading factor that distinguishes Teslas. ID4s, Volkswagen. This is a touring car, fairly heavy. It's 4,500 pounds, but it'll take you very elegantly and swiftly, and with good range capabilities if you want to go traveling. And around town, I would think they're a little bit big for driving around town, but for touring, I think they're an excellent opportunity to look at. Again, going back to the climate resiliency, we've been talking about the Ioniq 5. The Ioniq 5 has, inside the car, it has 110 volt, but you can also get an adapter that plugs right into your fast charge port. And from there, you can bring out electricity into your home, plug it into your home as well from the outside of the car. Again, this is like when you're having a power failure, like possibly tonight, you wouldn't be on the call. You could be powering your internet and your computer and your basic lights and your freezer from your car. And the car is going to have enough electricity for 2 to 3 days worth of juice, and enough juice to maybe run to a store for supplies. This is the climate resiliency feature that is really going to make a difference. And this is why I think Hyundai's particular are going to be much more popular. Tesla doesn't have this feature yet, and but some others do, such as the Ford F-150 Lightning. This is, as the first probably high production pickup, a very popular vehicle in Canada. This is taking off. You have to really line up to get these. The wait times are critical. And again, here they have 3 times as much power available from a Ford F-150 Lightning than from the Hyundai Ioniq 5s. And this has actually, you can see there's a 220 volt there as well as 110 volt. And more actual power available. So this comes obviously from a much bigger battery pack in the truck. But these are all really terrific developments that are very exciting. And then just to round out the variety of electric cars available, this is my favorite. I'm thinking about putting a deposit down on this car. This is an ultra efficient two-seater. The company started back in 2012. It actually went bankrupt in 2017, and then it was revived by the original founders in 2019, and now they're starting into production. They've just announced a solar panel they've always had solar panels, but they made them more extensive, and now they're putting them forward with a 1,600 kilometer range with solar PV assist. And in fact, what they're saying, if you have this car and you live in California, there's enough sunlight. If you park it outside and you park it into the sun, you can generate 40 kilometers worth of range per day, which is, what did I say earlier? That's what an urban commuter basically does. So essentially, this could be like your solar calculator that never needs batteries. I mean, unless you're doing some very long range, but because it's so efficient, the battery packs are relatively small, so charging up is faster with smaller amounts of power. With 110, it charges up a lot faster because it's so efficient, and it's aerodynamic, and they have full air conditioning and safety crash bags and everything. So it's a really exciting car. This should be available 2 or 3 years in Canada, I would say. I know people that have deposits on them, but it'll be a while. Now, I wanted to talk, just wrapping up, about used EVs. As a chartered accountant, I've always bought used cars. I mean, it's the smart way to do it. Don't allow all that depreciation to land in your lap. Let somebody else have the depreciation hit as you drive it off the lot, and buy it a year or two later. And that's what I've always done in my past. But in the early teens of 2012, 2013, there were no used EVs because they just weren't there. So I bought a new one, and I'm very happy with it. Today, because of the supply chain issues, we have problems with EVs. This is just a screenshot from just a couple days ago. The prices of these used EVs are astronomical. They all would have been $10,000 to $15,000 less just about a year ago, but now they're in high demand. The problem with these older Nissan Leafs is, like my 2012, you don't want to buy a car if it's your primary car that only gets 80 kilometers range, like my 2012 does, which started out its life with only a 24 kilowatt hour pack. This 2015 would have a 30 kilowatt hour pack, 6 kilowatt hours more, and the 2018s and newer will be 40 kilowatt hours, or maybe 62. But these are older ones. The range here, this one says its estimated range of 125. Well, if you just need it as a second city car, or you don't do long trips, that's all you need. And you'll be very happy with it. The performance will be there, and your gauge on the dash is going to tell you exactly how many kilometers you have at any point in time. So it's not really that risky. You can also get a good assessment of the battery pack condition. That's available with every electric car, so you know what the battery packs are. At some point in time, we'll be replacing battery packs. Some people already have on used EVs. A friend of mine had a 2011 EVs. He was the first person in British Columbia to own a Nissan Leaf. He finally got it replaced after 220,000 kilometers. Now, that was the first generation, and he, I think, got it replaced for about $10,000. In the future, the reason why there isn't a lot of replacement batteries available right now at a reasonable price is because there hasn't been many that need to be replaced. Yes, my car only has 80 kilometers range, but it's still very functional. If it had 50 kilometers range, it's still functional for me for running errands from the house as my second car. So it's not like the car breaks and your transmission goes and you need to spend $3,500 to get the transmission fixed. No, it just means that I have to charge up more and I can't take it on long trips, or I won't. So it's a different type of problem. It's a very soft problem with soft edges. You sort of know it's coming. It doesn't fail all at once like a internal combustion engine car. And the other thing about used EVs, they changed the tax laws, the provincial tax laws, I think it was last year, and there's no PST on used EVs, which is a bit of a break because there isn't any other brakes available currently. There used to be. All right. I think I've overstayed my 25, 30 minutes, but I'm happy. I'd just like to point out, if you'd like to participate on an open line, just like this at Vancouver Electric Vehicle Association, they have meetups every Tuesday and Saturday, 7 p.m. and 10 a.m. on Saturday mornings. Every week, there's always someone there to ask questions of. Just go to the Viva website and you can sign up there and you'll get a link. And if you join Viva, you'll get automatically sent into your inbox the Zoom links for every meeting. And if you want to get in touch with me, if you have a condo that is considering getting a project going and you want some help getting the project configured and approved and get your owners ready to approve a project, that's what the consulting that I'm doing right now. So let's send it over to open the floor for questions, and I'd be happy to take some.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much, John. I noticed that there was a question in the chat asking about two questions. One is about, and I had the same one, hybrid versus electric. I presume that when you're referring to most of the electric vehicles, just straight electric, right?
Straight battery electric. Yeah.
Yeah. What about hybrid versus electric? I have a hybrid car. I love it. But what do you see as the sort of major kind of advantages, disadvantages between the two?
So there are two types of hybrids, essentially. There's just there's gasoline electric hybrids that run totally off a fuel tank. So that's your classic Toyota Prius.
Right.
And then there is a plug-in hybrid, which has a small battery and it has partial electric range. So those plug-in hybrids, they do get some of the benefits. They usually get half of the incentives that electric cars do. Mm-hmm. So that helps them out. The benefit of being an internal combustion engine component to it is that part of the industry is cheap. They've got huge amounts of capacity to produce engines, transmissions, and the price of those things have come down a lot. The problem with electric is it's a new industry with new types of supply chain requirements in batteries and different types of materials, and that is more expensive. The only downside to a battery electric is it's a little bit more expensive than a hybrid plug-in hybrid. Plug-in hybrids are cheap because the regular engines and the regular internal combustion engine side of it is cheap because they've been producing it for 120 years. Those prices are cheap, and it's a much smaller battery. They're putting in a tiny battery in those ones, so they're cheaper to buy, but they come with all the problems. You sort of double up on problems because you still have your internal combustion engine that still needs an oil change on a regular basis. Yeah. It still needs spark plugs and everything else that goes on. Although hybrids are much more efficient than the conventional internal combustion engine without it, because you do get the benefits. I mean, we had a Prius, and in fact, that's the car that got me into electric cars. My wife bought a 2005 Toyota Prius, and I really liked the electric side of it. And I said, well, why can't you just have all electric? And that got me on my electric car journey back in 2005. Now that car, we just sold it last year to buy the 2018. And it was extremely reliable. But I ended up starting to drive it after the pandemic. I started to drive it. I was doing some work up on Vancouver Island, and I just hated driving that vehicle because it was just so gutless and smoky and vibrating. Like I just couldn't stand it anymore. And my wife had been driving the 2012, and I said, look, I don't want to drive this anymore. And she says, well, I don't want to drive it, so let's get rid of it. And that's the thing of it. But Yes. So they're cheaper to buy. Plug-in hybrids may be cheaper to buy, but you're going to be disappointed that you still have to put gasoline and you still have to go for the repairs and everything else. And over time, if you look at what's happening in sales, the sales of plug-in hybrids have been dropping. They are dropping. They're not expanding. It's all battery electric because once you're there, it's so simple, so quiet. It's maintenance free.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, I don't have a question, but I have a statement. Actually, I watched this afternoon on BBC. John Kerry was speaking regarding all these floods are going on because of the global warming. And he emphasized how they are approaching a lot of companies to go to cars to go electrical. And Ford was one of them companies that made a comment that 2035 they will be full electrical. That was quite interesting.
Mhm.
I'll say a few things to that, Gita. I have an issue with the automotive industry generally. I mean, as far as their promotion of SUVs and pickups and the supersizing of those vehicles, it's gotten out of hand. And now the problem is, if you look at the Ford F-150, yes, it's great that it's electric, but it's now a 6,000 pound truck. And that's just the 150. They haven't started producing the more commercial grade, you know, and we still are, I think we're building cars that are much too big for our needs. It's a manufactured need that you have to have a big testosterone filled truck to drive around town, and people are basically carrying groceries. So I have a problem with the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers. That's the Detroit 3, Chrysler, Ford, Chevrolet, and Chevrolet. They're leading ones. Like they're putting out the Hummer, the Silverado, and they're huge, massive pickup trucks. And this is ridiculous. This is not how we treat our planet. We should be buying vehicles that are fit our needs, and we don't need large, big vehicles. Can you imagine? I mean, watch some old 1970s movies.
I agree with you at that point. As you know, if you live in the prairies, you need power. You need a good SUV.
If you live on the prairies, I was visiting friends, relatives of mine in Ontario a few years ago, just before the pandemic. It was January. It was minus 15 degrees outside. Now, I've lived my entire life well, except for 5 years in Ontario. I've lived on the West Coast, and we're pretty lucky here. We don't have minus 15 weather for very long, if at all. And it's pretty brutal, but still, I still believe the supersizing of automobiles should not continue while they electrify.
John, could you speak a little bit more about the incentives? I've heard that, if I understand you correctly, PST is gone from used EVs. What about new? I know that the province had some rebates, and I think they were federal rebates. Is that still on, or is pretty much gone?
The federal rebates are $5,000 off of any electric car under, I believe there's a bit of a trick. The basic sticker price of the vehicle has to be under $55,000, I believe. And then, or under $45,000. But if you buy options on the base that don't exceed $55,000, you can still get the $5,000 grant. So they basically, the federal government said, we're not going to give you $5,000 to buy a $120,000 Tesla Model Y. So, which I think is reasonable. And what the provincial government had, we used to have a $4,000 grant, then it was down to $3,000, and now it is income tested. So if you earn more than, I believe, $80,000 a year, then it basically shaves down the benefit there.
Mhm.
So, and I think this is quite reasonable. People with a lot of money should not be incented to buy luxury cars. I've had this argument with a lot of people,
Yeah.
but essentially the benefit of electric cars is once you have them, they cost you nothing to run other than insurance, which is the same for whatever car you buy.
Thank you.
Great.
So those are the incentives for purchasing. Leila, I'll give you a little bit more on incentives for people who living in condos who need to have charging in their building. So and the reason I'm passionate about this is because I was one of the advocates for getting these programs in place. British Columbia has a leading program called the EV Ready program. It's administered by Clean BC and through BC Hydro in BC Hydro territory and through Fortis BC if you're getting electricity from Fortis in the Eastern Kootenays. That program basically looks at the problem of rewiring for condos. Condos, as I said, new condos have 100% of the stalls wired. Anything that was built past 2018, past 2011 in Vancouver, 20%, past 2018 in Vancouver, 100% of the stalls are wired, ready to plug in a charger. And that is the most convenient way to charge your car. So you come home at the end of the day, you plug your car in, you don't think about it again until you unplug to leave it the next time you use your car. With that, and you have to consider that 45% of the people in British Columbia live in condos, and over 60% in the city of Vancouver live in condos or rental buildings. So this is a very important segment of the market that is being blocked. The EV Ready program basically is a holistic approach, and it was recommended by Viva that a study be done to find out the best way to electrify the entire building. And the province now contributes up to $120,000 for the wiring, and it's a straight grant. It's available for anybody who applies and goes through the hoops. It's not that hard to do. That's available to offset your costs. And there's also another 14,000 top up for chargers if you're putting some chargers in as well. And additionally, from time to time, the federal government has a program through NRCan Canada. It's called the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program. And stratas are now starting to apply for this program. You have to put in a minimum of 20 chargers, but the federal funding can be up to 50% of your project costs. So, and you can stack this with the provincial government. So in certain cases, you can get up to a maximum of 75% of your project costs covered. So that really makes it easier for legacy condos to upgrade their building, but even better than that. And this is what I'm very pleased of, because I was sort of the instigator of this next thing. British Columbia has had a BC low carbon fuel standard since 2008. It was brought into legislation in 2008 by Gordon Campbell, the Liberal government. It was effective January 1st, 2010, and it requires a 1% reduction in carbon intensity of all the motor fuels, diesel and gasoline produced in British Columbia. And a 1% reduction in carbon intensity every year. So the oil and gas companies have been meeting those targets, but now it's getting tough. They're now more than halfway through that 20% decline to 2030. And every January 1st, they have to reduce their carbon intensities. The carbon credits that they have to make up are getting more and more expensive. And I realized there's a big gap last year. Long story short, I wrote a letter to the minister, Bruce Ralston. We had other parties sign on, ChargePoint and actually Suncor, which is the oil company that owns Petrocan, who had a series of Petrocan DC fast charge stations across Canada. They actually signed on to the letter as well. And what we did previously, BC Hydro got all the carbon credits for EV charging. And what we said, look, if you want to really make things happen, allow those carbon credits not to go to the utility, but to go to the people who install the charging stations. And so we made that change, and it is huge. The amount of money from carbon credits is very significant. And for any strata, this can actually make a new income stream. Over a period of maybe 5-6 years, you can recover your net project costs after all those other grants, and then you can start earning income on your EV charging. For the next 5-10 years, it's almost a sure thing. After that, who knows?
Okay, and John, are you working on those kind of assessment of putting the project and proposals together and do the calculations? Is that what you said you're working?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, I haven't had to really advertise it all. I started in the summer. It started with my own condo, and that's how I saw the problem, what the problem was. And so basically I realized that I was the only person that really understood how all the pieces fit together. So I was inundated with requests to speak to strata councils and how should we do our project and how does it take, to put together. So I started it, and then now it's just sort of snowballing. So
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic.
Neil, there's a question in a chat. I don't know if you've seen.
Oh, no, I didn't see it there. Hang on.
I see it here.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
From Jean. Yeah. If you
leave an EV parked for a long time, say 2 to 3 weeks, is there a loss of stored power? Typically not in the traction pack. But what happens is if your 12-volt battery is weak, that's where you have a problem. And if the 12-volt battery goes down, that's powering the brain to your car. If the brain doesn't turn on, nothing happens. And it's happened to me 3 weeks in France, came back, car just went bloop, nothing happened. So you have to either jump your 12-volt and again, in my 2012 Nissan, 2 sets of batteries of 12-volt lead acid batteries have had to be replaced. There's another issue about, remember when I was talking about keeping your state of charge of your battery pack within 30 and 80%? Remember how I said the best way to store a battery is at 50% state of charge? You don't want to charge to 100% and leave it at 100%. If you're going on a long trip, charge it to 100% and the very next morning start driving. But some people have realized, oh, I got my car charged at the airport and I was gone for 3 weeks and it was sitting at 100% for 3 weeks. That is not good for your battery pack. It's a stressor on the battery pack. It's chemically stressed because it's just the chemistry of the pack. Now, a lot of manufacturers, the early batteries were worse. The new batteries are pretty good because when they tell you it's 100%, it really isn't. It's only about 95. And they basically bring you to the middle of the state of charge with false numbers. When they say it's 100%, it's really 95. And when it's 20%, it's really 25%. So basically, they built in protection, and that's why batteries. One of the reasons why batteries are lasting longer too. That was a good question.
Great, yeah, very interesting. Yeah. Well, John Chan.
I have a quick. I know we're running a bit over, but quick question. If it's too long, tell me. I'll ask you another time. But in terms of like running into accidents, collisions like that, or even just like someone breaks in or I don't know, breaks your door or whatnot in an EV, would the repair in those sense cost a lot more because there's a lot of parts to every single piece of the car?
Well, first of all, on safety, if you're in a crash with an electric car, there's the number one, and since I built my own Porsche back 10-15 years ago, I did put these things into the car. And the typical thing that happens when you're in a crash, there's a circuit that breaks the pack up so that if it's a 400-volt pack, it disconnects it and breaks it up so that there isn't 400 volts around in the car. It trips breakers so that the voltage is brought down so that it isn't at a dangerous voltage.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that happens in most electric cars. And there's all of the high voltage is usually well buried in the middle of the car, and it's all bright orange. First responders are trained, and there is training on this, how to deal with electric cars that are in crashes. And if they're in serious crashes, that can be an issue. But typically they're pretty well safe because of all these breaks that happen. As far as the cost of repair, that is a very interesting question. You don't have to have an electric car to have a very expensive repair. If you like to have Mercedes-Benz and you hit the headlight of a Mercedes-Benz, that headlight has to be engineered and reset by Mercedes-Benz, and nobody else will touch it. And it'll be like a really expensive repair. Teslas, some of the early Teslas, Model S's and Model X's were all aluminum bodies. Those ones are much more expensive to repair and much more likely to be written off because they're aluminum. Now, when they started making Model 3s and Model Ys, they went back to steel, and it's easy to repair. It depends from car to car, but really, I don't think you can generalize one way or the other. It's really on the model of the car, and electric isn't going to make much difference. In fact, electric simplifies a lot of things. There's much fewer parts, and they're all down the bottom of the car, basically, where the motor, the battery. So it's much more protected from damage. There isn't radiators at the front of the car to get smashed in. All that stuff is, it's actually, I would say, generally electric cars fare accidents better. But I it's still early days. There's a lot more electric cars that have anti-avoidance, as most cars do these days. So it's, I think the incidence of cars getting in accidents is actually being reduced too, simply from technology applied to everything.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for those great questions. I think and to John for just an amazing presentation. Our goal here was to learn, and I think we're all going away after learning a lot about electric vehicles. I know I sure found out a lot of things I didn't consider that will certainly impact my next vehicle decision, I'm sure. It was very, very interesting, and you are undoubtedly the person to have to share all this information with. So thank you once again for taking your time to be with us and help us understand this industry. And I think it has made a big difference for everyone here. We very much appreciate you, and we know where to go now for some more information if we want to.
Yes, definitely check out the Viva online meetups. They're a lot of fun, and you can meet some more people that know a lot about electric cars.
That's great. Well, thanks very much. Thank you to our guests for